All right, so the exercise this morning is to take into consideration the what I was referring to as the golden rule in Mongo. And in Mongo, the golden rule is data that is accessed together should be stored together. And so in our final project, we kind of can look at the bugs collection and the comments collection. And I could see you gotta have to start with the end in mind. Okay, and starting with the end in mind, you're picturing or mocking up a screen for an end user. And I could see in this scenario where if you look at a user like at a single bug, I could see a screen where you're just looking at all that bug information, as well as on the same screen you're looking at all the comments for that bug. So to me, that's a use case where maybe we don't need a separate collection of comments. Instead, what you do is you have a comments property that is an array of objects, and those objects are your individual comments. And so in that scenario, we would actually remove the collection called comments, and that collection of comments would no longer be needed. And like we did yesterday, when you had that scenario, you link those two things together with the keys, right? The object IDs, we call them primary keys and foreign keys in normalized databases. Okay, but in this scenario, you could completely get rid of comments and replace it with an array of comment objects on the bugs collection. So I thought, since yesterday we did a little helper video where we kind of coded separate collections, maybe we can continue today using this other project that I'm doing, this Tailrunner, and I've got it called Tailrunner Old because I did a different one. I've got a newer code base for Tailrunner, separate code base for Tailrunner. Yesterday we kind of did separate collections between, basically I call it the dog owner, but really these are our users, and they had orders. Right? And I thought that was a good scenario where data should be kept in separate collections. Again, why? Well, if you think of this as your users collection, if you think of orders, and I think back to like real world applications, a lot of times you have like an account page where you can look at like your user information, your username and password, your first name, your address, all of your account information. That would essentially be, the dog owner. The pet owner, whoever the user of the application is, right? And so you could change your settings for your account on one page, but then typically there's a separate orders page. Like you could go to a page for all of your orders where you could search for your orders or view your orders or what have you. So because data is accessed separately, you could choose to store that data separately. Okay, and that's, again, kind of just using that data that's accessed together should be stored together. Data that's accessed separately doesn't mean it has to be stored separately, but it makes sense. It can be. Okay, so kind of going back to what we're going to code today is if we have a dog owner collection, right, and we can kind of see, we can get all the dog owners. We can get a pet owner by ID, add a new one, update one, and delete one. We have to figure out, and we have to come up with another one-to-many relationship. And I haven't planned this out, but so I don't really know what that might be yet. So if I think about let me look at my Amazon, because again, this is, if I just use Amazon as my example, I'm going to pull up my Amazon on another screen and just kind of go to my account, your account. Okay, and it says your addresses, your lists. So like a wish list, you can have many wish lists. So maybe a dog owner could have call it a list wish. I don't like the keyword list because it obviously means something in programming, right? But a wish list, maybe a dog owner could have 0 or many wish lists, which would be things that they want for their dog. And so, that's as good as an example as anything, really. It doesn't necessarily matter. And so, kind of going back to my database, this is my separate collections from yesterday, and here I've got John Doe with his orders, Jane Doe, and so what might this look like? And we can just kind of hard code the data in and then start working with it. Because what do we need to do? We need to have a route to add a new wish list or add an item onto a wish list, these kinds of things. And so here, just to kind of show you the structure, we'll kind of start by adding a field, add a field after orders. This would be our wish list. And again, this is going to be an array of objects. Right, so object right here. All right, and inside of this object are key value pairs. And so this could just be, we would call it wish list name. And then, let's see, he has Rex is one of his dogs. So I'll call it Rex wish list. That makes sense. And then what comes after that? Another property. And we could just make this object a couple of strings, and it should have an object ID as well. And so I might need to, put an object ID on that. And then it would make sense maybe to have an array of items on our wish list. Or each, I would call it an items array. That makes this a little bit more complicated, right? So you have an array of objects, and inside of that we've got another array. Item 0 would be large dog bone. Okay, something like that. So it's an array, it's an object, and it needs an object ID. I left that off, so let's edit our object ID, add a field after items. This is an object ID, and it'll just generate one for me. Underscore ID. Let's see if I did that right. Let me refresh. Wish list is one object. That object has an object ID. It has an array of items and a wish list name. Okay, so there we go. That is at least the structure of the data. Okay, so now let's go ahead back into TailRunner and boot up the back end. Start dev script. And of course, if I kind of, let's see, this was adding, let me change this request name from yesterday real quick. Add new order is what that was called. And let me close all of that. And if I get, let's see, nothing to do with orders, we are now just list all the dog owners. Okay, so now we can see our first object has that orders from yesterday, but it also has a wish list property, which is an array, and that array has one object in it. That object has a wish list name, an item, and an ID. And so maybe the first thing to do is to make a route to add a new item to a wish list, right? And you guys can already see probably it's going to be a little bit easier because you already got the ID hanging out here. You have the ID of the dog owner, and you have the ID of the wish list. So if I think about over here, we could make a different module for this, but for the sake of continuing on without doing that, let's see what our route is. So we've got API pet owners. And then we're going to need an ID. So let's do this. Let's say add item to wish list. So this would be router dot post. Now /: user ID. I'm going to be a little bit more specific now. / wish list. So really what we need, if I kind of go back to the data, we need a wish list ID, because we can have many wish lists, right? Wish list / wish list ID. We need a user ID, and because they can have many wish lists, we need a wish list ID. Right? Because kind of going back here, we've got the ID here as well as the ID here. And that will allow us to add one item to the wish list. Let's just say get wish list. This is a way to just get all the wish lists, which should return this subset of data, right? The array. And probably we need to do one or the other first. I was thinking maybe we do this. So let's go into our database module. We definitely need we already have get user by ID. We can use that, which will return the wish list. So let's start by getting the user, right? So const user ID rec params dot user ID. That's valid. Now looking at the suggestion here, let's get the wish list ID, then let's get the current owner by our database method, get owner by ID. We'll do a little validation on the owner, make sure we get the owner. But if we get the owner, we need to get something from the body. This is why we can use this to kind of get started. But this is where it all falls apart here, because here we need to actually get something out of the rec.body. So going back to at this point, we're just adding something onto the items array, which is a string. And so let's assume they're sending a string, which is the item from the body. So they're going to send over the item from the body. Now this is, again, assuming there's only one item. It might be an array of items, but for now we're just going to assume one string. And what we would do is we would push the item onto the wish list. So here, current owner wish list push item. Of course, then we have to update the current owner, and then we'll send back a wish list updated if that works. And notice we're not using results here in any sort of way. Okay, so let's see now, wish list ID. I see where this is falling apart. You can kind of see based on the color coding. This is just pushing onto my wish list, which is not correct. This is just adding a new item onto my wish list. I need to actually select the object ID in that wish list to get object 0 and then push that onto the array, which is kind of where I was going. I need that wish list ID. Sir?
You know that middleware function, valid ID?
Yeah.
Can we use that twice? Can we have like valid ID for user ID?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, you could use that twice. And you definitely should bring that in, because that's useful to validate object IDs. So this is where I got to put some thought into this. This is not correct, line 113. I've got the owner, but I need to get the object ID. So we can do a find. Right, so current owner wish list okay, that's crazy. Find where the wish list ID double equals wish list ID. Now the issue that we have with this is that wish list ID is a string. It is not an object ID. So that is where that valid ID method comes in useful, to convert the string into an object ID. And then we're comparing an object ID to an object ID. So let me bring up that middleware code. and show kind of what that looks like. And I'll walk through, if you guys haven't seen this, if you don't watch a prior video, let's do that. Okay, so kind of glancing at this, we know object ID is a method from our MongoDB driver. So importing a method that can generate new object IDs is really what that does. And if you pass an argument into it, as we do here, then you can specify the object ID. Otherwise, it'll generate a random object ID. All right, so here's our function called valid ID. So we're making a JavaScript function called valid ID, and it takes a string as an input. Okay, so that string will be sent into this method. And it returns an anonymous arrow function. So this is quite a bit different syntax, right? This function that we're creating returns, and remember middleware, the key benefit of middleware is that it can access the request and the response object. So it can modify these objects. Okay, and the keyword next is how you call the next function in the line of the call stack. Okay, so anyways, these are your standard inputs. And this is kind of a standardized way of writing middleware, to write a function that returns a function. And if you look at what we're doing here, we're creating a new parameter, rec dot the name of your ID. So rec dot whatever the name of your ID is equal to an object ID that was coming from rec, the request object params parameter name. So in this case, wish list ID. So there will be a new variable called rec dot wish list ID, and that will be an object ID. Okay, so in short, rec dot params wish list ID will be converted to rec.wishlistID, and rec.wishlistID will be an object ID. So if I bring this in, okay, and I'm going to, as I did in my video, make a folder called middleware, M-I-D-D-L-E, middleware. I'm going to make a new file called valid capital ID. I'm going to paste this in. And now I can call valid ID, pass it a string called user ID. Then I could say valid ID and pass it wish list ID. Put another comma there. Now, we need to import valid ID. Import valid ID, and you have to go up 2 directories. Well, I'm going to check my pathing here. // is the API, // middleware /valid ID.js. That's the correct path. So now valid ID is exported here and imported here. Then we can use it here. Now, again, what this does is that now we can, instead of doing rec.params, remember rec.params is a string, but rec.userid is an object ID. And rec.wishlistID is also an object ID. Now, the problem that I am going to run into is that now that this is an object ID, if I pass this in over here, user ID to my get pet owner ID, let me go back to get pet owner ID. Get pet owner ID. Notice I don't need to do this anymore. I've already validated my ID. So I can get rid of that logic. And I, again, do not need to convert the object ID here. I've already converted it. So I kind of had to refactor my code because I converted to an object ID earlier as opposed to what I was doing before. So now, let's kind of scroll down. We are up and running. And we wrote a whole lot of code, but nonetheless, these are now object IDs. And the item comes from request.body. We get this by ID. That might have a bug in it, but let's check it. We can still check it against some parameters there. Kind of want to double check my work on this find method. But what I could do is debug owner and stringify my current owner to see if that new item is in fact on the array. That'll tell me right here on line 114 if that worked. Okay, so now let's hit our post and see if we can add an item to our wish list. All right, tail runner, add a request. We said it's a post request. Localhost 2024 : let's get our owner first. Right there. /API /pet owners. Pet owner ID /wish list, I think we said.
Yeah.
And then /wish list ID, which is this one. Okay, so that's clunky. Thankfully, you can generate your URLs dynamically in React, so you don't have to like copy and paste user. And let's go ahead and add item to wish lists by ID, something like that. And we go into our body, and we said the item is going to be a bag o' food. Okay, and like I always say, let's see what breaks. And it looks like it's not getting even to the route. So when it spins like that, debug dog owner, I would just say add item to wish list route hit. And that's always the first place to kind of debug. API. Let's go to the index. API /pet owners.
You don't got your /:. Your ID supposed to be /:ID.
Oh, I missed something here. I got user ID and wish list ID here.
Yeah, but you're supposed to have colon for the actual ID on both sides. In your
Right here.
No, so you see your route.
My route's right here. Yep.
Your URL, you're supposed to have a colon before you actually put the ID when you're trying to get the route posted. You just put / and then the number.
Right here. You don't need the colon. Are you saying colon here?
That's what you put.
Yeah, you put the colon here to signify variable here, but you don't need it in Postman.
Okay.
It's not finding my endpoint, so let me double trace this to here. Wish list. This is a post, router.post. Let me reboot the thing, control save. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste. I'm just going to retype this. Pet owners slash user ID slash wish list slash wish list ID, which is oh gosh darn it, I started making the change to the wrong one. Okay. Not sure where my error was, but we got here, so that's good. And now let's make sure we're getting our current owner, debug dog owner. Current owner is that. Send it. Okay, so we got the current owner. Okay, good. So that's beautiful. And so our get pet owner by ID is working. And then wish list. So I'm going to debug dog owner wish list dot underscore ID. I'm going to spit out and wish list ID. I'm going to compare these two variables, just kind of glancing at them there. Okay. Doesn't seem to be debugging that. So if current owner, yes sir.
Is it because, are you casting as an object that ID in the database.js in that function still? Because you just brought in that valid ID, you might not have changed it.
Yeah, it might be what function?
In my database JS.
Yeah, in your update pet owner, you might be like,
Pet owner ID.
you might be converting it from
You,
object ID.
you might be right there, but I'm not even that far, I don't think, right? So I'm just trying to get to this else block.
I see.
So debug dog owner else block hit. And so I would expect, I might not even need this if statement. But notice I don't think I'm hitting this else block. Oh, yes I am. Okay, good. Okay. It's definitely, I think it's this line because I'm not getting here, right? So notice I am hitting the else block, but I'm not doing this line. And okay, this is a, find the wish list, return the wish list.id. Oh, wait a minute. Wish list. So this is a find an item where the item's ID. I think it might be a naming conflict. Find an item where the item ID. We already had this wish list, and I was naming a variable here called wish list. So find an item where that item's ID equals here I'm going to say current owner dot wish list. I'm just going to throw that query there, see if that query is returning what I think it, so that returns undefined. Yeah, it's this that's not working. In which case, let me troubleshoot this. So I think this is okay, but let me just spit out the array. In this case, I'm just going to stringify the array. I don't even need to stringify it. Let's send that. And so this is getting your array. Now that's what it is. It's an array of objects. So I can't directly access the ID. So I need to query an array of objects. All right. So solution that we found, Matt found, so thank you for that, was using an equals method to test equality instead of a double equals or a triple equals. And that got that to return true. That just reminds me of like back in the day, string methods in Java. You could not use the standard comparison operators, which are double equals and triple equals. You had to write an equals method to test the values of a string. You couldn't test strings using the equal signs. So the reason being is that the double equals would test the memory address, which is never the same. And whereas the equals method would actually go into the string and test the values. And that it shouldn't be the case for normal strings, but this is not a normal string. This is an object ID. So this object ID must kind of use those comparison operators similar to that. Anyways, equals method versus double equals sign. When I change that, and then we push the item, and then I can kind of get rid of my debugs. And then I came back to my route. I added a bag of food, and I got wish list updated. And if I now query all my pet owners, I can now see that the wish list has a large dog bone and a bag of food. So I don't know that the queries that you have to write are any more simple. As you guys saw, that there's always a process to figuring out how to get this thing added into the database. I'm not going to say that it's any easier, but I like it. I actually like this way of working with this. And this is just one operation, right? Updating and deleting and all this other stuff also has to be done if you choose to do that. Structure your code that way. Okay, but this is a starting point of which you can kind of use this as your basis to doing the other operations, which it would take me all day to demonstrate every one of those. So I just want to get you started. Any other questions?